Well, I feel like I've been on some bizarro roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
But there is no way, no how, that 50 states could have certified votes for Biden and or Trump, and there have been a stolen election. It's insane to even think that, because people voted. They did find voter fraud in Pennsylvania. 3 cases. I believe it was Pennsylvania. 3 cases. One attempted to vote as his son after he had already cast his ballot, and the other 2 tried to vote for their dead mother or father.
Right.
And all 3 of them were Trump supporters, unfortunately. As far as voter irregularity, really, in this day and age with the pandemic, things had to be changed in the way we voted. I voted early. Virginia started the 45-day early voting window. We voted about 40 days early because we could drive in, go in, cast our ballot, and go walk out, and there wasn't another soul in the polling precinct except the people who were running the polls, the poll workers and the poll watchers.
Right.
You did your thing, you filled out your ballot and ran it through the machine, and the machine calculated your reg ballot, and out the door you went. Mm-hmm. No one handled your ballot at all. Once you filled it out, you ran it through the machine. So it was early, no excuse voting throughout this entire state, and at many other states. States did not send out absentee ballots willy-nilly. You had to request a ballot. They did send out sample ballots. They did that in Virginia. They did it in North Carolina.
Right.
But no, how could you steal an election? This was probably the most secure, watched election in the history of this country. It's just unbelievable to even think that there was widespread voter fraud and ballots being thrown out. And, oh, Lord have mercy. I can't even begin to think about it.
I think a lot of people took that information to heart, these accusations of fraud, and that's why things have been unfolding the way they have.
Well, the thing is, if you say something enough times, people will believe it. It doesn't have to be true. You just have to keep saying it. And a group of people will say, oh, well, it's got to be true. No, it doesn't. Where's your evidence? And as a science-oriented person, I'm sorry. Show me the money. Show me the evidence. I don't feel comfortable. I feel on edge and very nervous about what can happen if Congress doesn't act.
Right.
They were put in so much danger because one person thought it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. March down to the Capitol. Take the Capitol. I'll be right there with you. No, he wasn't.
Yeah.
But that was just, to me, it was insanity. I never thought I would see something like that in this country. I really fear for Kamala Harris.
Right.
And it just, to me, we've been here before. We've seen people assassinate a president. We've seen candidate assassinated. We've seen a civil rights leader assassinated. We've seen 2 of those assassinated, actually.
Right. Yeah.
And an attempt on Ronald Reagan. And it's just, the list goes on, and it scares me that could happen again. it just, to me, it is just wrong. And I fear that kind of mentality in such a large portion of the population that's scary. It's just scary. It's not common sense. It's not logic. And why would you even think that way?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. Something I actually said, I'm glad my parents are not alive to see this. Because my father literally fought in both the North Atlantic and the Pacific because of things like that. My husband fought in Vietnam because of things like that.
Yeah.
He was deployed to the White House when Nixon was in the White House because they were afraid that somebody was going to do a siege on the White House. That was when he was in the Marine Corps. So, it's frightening.
I can't understand how they were able to breach the Capitol in that way. And I hope that they're solving that.
Well, it had to do with calling up the National Guard not calling them up, calling up the D.C. National Guard and going, but you can't have any weapons and you can't have any riot gear or anything like that. And it just, that investigation is going to explain quite a few things, and I don't think some folks are going to like what's going to be found out. I just have this suspicious mind of the old school teacher that says, there's something rotten here, and you don't get into the Capitol building without assistance when it's locked down. The other thing is the Capitol Police were majorly outnumbered. And there's no way that they could, what do? You got 1,000 people coming at you and you're one person. I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Every lawmaker that was in that building was in danger.
Do you think that when the congressional meeting was resumed, there was a unity on the floor between the two parties at that point?
I believe that even before this all occurred, there was a large pod of partisanship as to objecting to certain battleground states, that for the most part, the Democrats and the Republicans had all agreed that the states had certified the ballots, and this was supposed to be a pro forma, just ceremonial. Yep, okay, here's Alaska's votes. This is how many we counted for Trump, and here's Wisconsin's votes, and here's how many were Biden votes, and so they get this number of electoral votes, and that should have been all that it was. But all of the GOP senators and congressmen who wanted to object basically stirred the pot. And then when Armageddon came to town, and I'm sure that's what they felt like, quite a few of them had a come to Jesus moment. But there was still this core group who did not want to work together with the other party and certify the votes that had already been counted and recounted. That small core group did not want to work with anyone. They wanted it their way or the highway.
Yeah.
And frankly, my opinion is that they fueled insurrection.
Right.
And that was nothing but insurrection. And it was brought about by information that they were given when they were called to come to Washington to rally with the president and go from there.
And one of the most interesting things about the events of January 6th, 2021 is that there was a tremendous amount of pressure that had been placed on Vice President Mike Pence by Trump during the preceding rally, if you remember.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that Mike Pence put on his big boy panties and said, no, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and this is what the Constitution says we must do. And he followed the law and the instruction for counting the electoral votes or certifying what had already been certified. And I think he did the best that he could do. From what I understand, he's pulled back to, he's in Blair House and he hasn't come to the White House since. So I think although there are rats deserting a sinking ship, I think Mike Pence actually stood up for principles and proper protocols and did what he needed to do.
A lot of other Republican lawmakers as well did the same. You know, there was a clip of Lindsey Graham that I heard, and he was saying something to the effect of, you know, Trump and I, we've been through a lot. This is where I draw the line, though. I'm out.
Between him and the minority leader of the Senate, both of them need to go back to their home states and resign. They have done nothing but block legislation and support Trump for 4 years and not stand up to him like they should have. They did his bidding. They were his handmaidens. That's a personal feeling because there are others who think that they're wonderful, but when you hold up 400 pieces of legislation and won't bring it to the floor of the Senate because the president doesn't like him and won't sign it. And I think that all started falling apart in December when Trump vetoed the defense bill, defense appropriations, and Congress had to just veto that or override that veto because never has a defense appropriation bill not been approved by the president. When you look at what's going on, what went on, many people lost their unemployment benefits because somebody wouldn't sign an extension of those benefits on time. He waited 1 day too long, and so they had to go back through the process of applying for unemployment. They very nearly lost their homes or their apartments because they can't pay the bills because they don't have a job and they aren't getting unemployment, but gee, they'd like to go to work, but it's not safe. So, you know, we just have an issue. I can remember when the Salk vaccine first came out on the sugar cubes, and they literally, you went in and they gave you the sugar cube, and it was just lines of people, and it was actually the military that was doing it.
Right.
Manning, the doctors and nurses were manning the stations to drop the right amount of serum on the sugar cube and stuff it in your mouth. I can remember when they were giving flu shots for one of the influenzas that was pretty bad. Went to the same auditorium, or cafetorium as it is called, and the same thing, lines and lines and lines, and you walked in and they took this gun and shot you in the arm with the vaccine, and just literally marched people through in large numbers.
Yeah.
This vaccine is so different. It's difficult to kind of line people up and do it. However, there is logistics that would make it possible to do larger numbers of people, and it has to do with, say, I want to go to the YMCA and I want to go in the pool. I have to sign up online for an available slot.
Yeah.
So if there are, and our pool is not that big, so normally we have 8 slots.
Yeah.
Because they don't want more than one person in a lane if they can help it.
Sure.
So you sign up, and once it hits 8, that's it. So if you've got 30 stations set up, and you know that you can do X number of shots per vial, and you just sign people up to come in the right groups to come in and do what needs to be done. It makes sense to me. You pull in nurses, paramedics, office doctors, the military, and train them to give the shots.
Yeah.
As a paramedic for 30 years, I gave shots all the time.
Right.
So train me how to handle that vaccine, and then we give the shots in large numbers. But you can't rely on just like a health department with 5 nurses.
Yeah.
That's, excuse me, 5 nurses can do 5 shots a piece. That's 25 shots in an hour.
Right. That's not going to work.
And that's not going to work. You're not going to get to 100,000 people at a time.
Yeah. Not even close.
No.
So there's a increasingly popular opinion now on the right side that the events at Capitol were in fact a setup, that they were operatives, like Antifa operatives, that went into the building and did the damage and then vacated. Do you think that ideas like that are at the root of the problems that we've been seeing?
Well, first off, I wouldn't put it past any one member of any one group, but we already know that a large number of the people who have their faces on TV desecrating the Capitol were members of several radical right groups, like the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
And I'm sure their leader would have been with them on that day, but he was arrested from the last rally they had in D.C., where he and some of his buddies ripped Black Lives Matter signs off a church and burned them, and that became a hate crime, and he got arrested as soon as he walked back in D.C.
Right.
So, in every riot, or every protest that may turn into a riot, there are outside agitators.
Yeah.
They may be from the left or they may be from the right. And unfortunately, they hijack these things and cause mayhem. So was it Antifa? There could have been some there. I wouldn't know them from Jack Sprat, but in general, I'm sure that they would dress in their normal goth-looking clothes of all black, but I don't know, because I'm not affiliated with them, and I know nothing about their tactics other than what I saw in Charlottesville and a couple of the other places. But were they the only ones there? Oh no, and that's been proven.
Right.
Because people are dumb. I mean, wear your work badge with your name and your picture on it and get caught on camera. Now go home and cry because your boss has fired you.
On the 6th, President Obama put out a statement, and in it he said, and I quote, "For 2 months now, a political party and its accompanying media ecosystem has too often been unwilling to tell their followers the truth, that this was not a particularly close election and that President-elect Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th. Their fantasy narrative has spiraled further and further from reality, and it builds upon years of sown resentments. Now we're seeing the consequences whipped up into a violent crescendo," end quote. Now, one of the issues that people have with a statement like that from somebody like President Obama is that, like so many things these days, people on the right are seeing it exactly the same as people on the left, but just with all the names and parties switched. So on the right, people read that and they say, well, we think that it's the left media that's biased and that's leading people on and that our voices aren't being heard. And we think that it's you guys that have spiraled further and further from reality. And we think that the violent crescendo was with you guys last summer and that sort of thing. So what do you say to that?
Well, first off, you can educate ignorance, but you can't cure stupid. Not even with duct tape and a sledgehammer. That was a sign I used to keep in my classroom.
I like that.
The fact of the matter is, people have to be willing to look at everything from both sides, and they're just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
I smile and say, gee, that's a beautiful dinner that you fixed there, sister, but I don't discuss politics with her.
Right.
Or her daughter, because they're the ones who are thinking, oh God, they're coming to take our guns. Mm-hmm. The far left are crazy people, and we don't like it, and you can't even discuss it with them because they're over there on the fringe, and their source of news is usually one news outlet, maybe two.
Yeah.
And they're not actually paying attention to what's actually being said. They make up their mind, and that's it. You cannot change their mind.
Right.
And that is, you can talk to them all day long about it. Nope. You can give them evidence. Nope. So when you look at what President Obama said, it's true.
Right.
But they don't want to hear it because they're listening to someone who is not firmly latched into reality. I mean, QAnon? Oh, please. Flat Earth Society's involved in there somewhere, I don't know. But the people who are speaking out and who have the platform on that he's talking about are out in cyberspace somewhere, floating around unattached to anything that even resembles evidence and facts and logic.
Now, on that, well, let's just say as an extension of that main theme, another issue is the language between, let's say, for argument's sake, CNN versus Fox News. And what I mean by that when something like this happens in a country, whether it's the BLM situation last spring and summer, or this, with concerns about electoral fraud, whatever it is, for a response to that degree, there's got to be something wrong for that many people to be involved. So do you think that it fans the flames when certain networks, newspapers, etc., they still refuse to use the word riot for the George Floyd protests, but they were very willing to use it? You know what I'm getting at. What are your thoughts on all of that?
They had a rally. Mm-hmm. They were spoken to, and then they just engulfed the Capitol with little or no resistance. So, it just, I feel like there's a parallel to what happened, but there's also a dichotomy, a split in what happened and how things were handled. Whether the media drives it or not, in this case, don't think so. But you are correct. One news outlet will call it a riot, another news outlet will call it a demonstration.
Yeah.
And you just have to look at what actually precipitated the reactions that caused it to turn from a peaceful demonstration into a riot or panic or whatever.
Right.
Did it happen because of what was done to them or what was said?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, the riots in Kenosha, the George Floyd riots that were going on, that was because of something that was done. And everyone knew it was wrong, but, you gotta walk a mile in somebody's shoes on that case. Or, I have lived with white privilege, and yet I didn't think I did. And the thing is, I came from a poor family. And I watched my father drag himself up by his bootstraps and graduate from college while I was in junior high school. He was my 7th grade history teacher for 9 weeks. So, I can't say. I have many, many good friends of color and ideologies, and we all get along fine because we can look and see what's in the other person's heart and in their minds. I have no idea what it would be like to walk down the street and wonder if I'm going to get arrested just because I'm walking down the street black. So, there was a singer, band person, Hollywood star, somebody. He was at his house. He walked out and went down the street to get something to his mailbox or something. And the police stopped him and asked him what he was doing in the neighborhood. Why are you going in that house? Well, I live here. Prove it. And this is somebody who is of celebrity status getting that done to him. Think about the poor person who just happens to be working in a neighborhood like that, and they get pulled over. I just can't understand it. So tell me how these folks on the other end are reacting to the same kind of situation. Nobody's taken your job. If you lost your job, it probably was because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You know, I cannot understand the people who think that it's this black man's fault that I don't have a job. No, if you did your job the way you're supposed to, you probably would have a job. I just have problems with that. Whether or not it's fueled by the different media outlets, I think in part, yes. Because we each listen to our own bias. I mean, I love listening to Rachel Maddow. She's a very brilliant woman. The other evening, I was watching Fox News. So I listen to more than one media outlet. And that you get to see multiple sides of the issues and make up your own mind.
Yep.
I don't let anybody tell me what to think.
You don't strike me as the kind of person who does.
You've got to look at issues, and you've got to study them, and you've got to know history and how things were situated in different times. I can see the need for Confederate statues, but that doesn't mean that they need to be in prominent places where they are. They might need to be moved. I also can see the need for civil rights statues, because that is our history. But no one gets to tell me how I think about those things, because I've looked at all sides of all the issues. So I've educated myself, and therein is the pearl of knowledge. If you educate yourself, then you're going to find that you're meeting in the middle with the vast majority of people where common sense reigns. When you get on the fringes, either side, you have some very craftily smart people, and you have some people who didn't pay attention in school. They couldn't even tell you what the Constitution was made up of. The only amendment they know is the Second Amendment, and they don't know it the way it's actually written. It's sad to think that that's exactly what's going on. And it is the fact that groups of people have not paid attention in school and learned anything from the history books or their history teachers or any of their other teachers.
When we look at, let's take what was happening, we'll say at the end of the year. Trump kind of ratcheted things up a few notches, and he pretty much began promising his base that there was going to be a change in the election. Do you think that Trump has been his own worst enemy?
Oh, without a doubt. I have watched and listened and prayed. They're going to change the votes in Georgia. No, they're not. In the first place, changing the vote for him in Georgia would not affect the Electoral College, and wasn't enough votes to make him win. It just would have made Biden win with less electoral votes than Trump won with in 2016.
Right.
So, yes, I think that he had been pounding the Secretary of State of Georgia, the one who's in charge of the elections, and literally being absolutely nasty to the governor. I think they just said, enough, we're not going to be disloyal to our office. We're not going to disrespect the expectations of fair and free elections as far as we can go, because we know Georgia has a bad history of election voter suppression. And even in this past election, thank you, Stacey Abrams, for pointing that one out. But I just think that they went, we're done, we're not going to do this, and so we're going to let the world know what's actually going on. But Trump just kept stepping in it. Every time he opened his mouth, about 33% of the population believes that he is the end-all and be-all, But I think some of them are just finally seeing that he's the emperor with no clothes. Of course, I said that years ago, and I meant it, and I heard it surface the other night. One of the news personalities said that he's the emperor with no clothes, and I'm going, you're stealing my line.
It wouldn't be the first time. You've had some good ones and made some good predictions over time. But a lot of people think that COVID also factored greatly into Trump's loss. So I'm wondering, let's put it this way. Going into 2020, it seemed that Trump had all the momentum in the world. He had, pretty high support and so forth. And then once COVID hit, things started to kind of unravel. Now, naturally, things will unravel with a pandemic of that degree, but at the same time, people thought that Trump didn't really help himself. Do you think COVID was his Achilles heel in a way?
I'm reluctant to say that it was totally his Achilles heel. I think that the House of Cards was beginning to fall apart, and COVID didn't help it because his total inaction. He just threw every governor in every state under the bus and said, your problem, figure it out. You know that order you had that was landing? We're taking it. And I think those kinds of things that did not help support his House of Cards, because his words came back to haunt him. I don't think it was by accident. The whole intent was to stop the counting of the electoral ballots. But two very bright young ladies, managed to grab that box containing all of the electoral college ballots and get it out of the Capitol to a safe place. That box looked to be a very old box, completely wooden. And I think the most damning thing was that Mary Trump tweeted out something about, you're finally seeing what we have all known all along. And she's been talking about it since she wrote her book. Her motives for that book were one thing. The information in it, though, is another. And unfortunately, it didn't paint a flattering picture. And what he did in Georgia is exactly what he did with the president of the Ukraine. It was total quid pro quo with a twist. Because in Georgia, he threatened him with criminal action.
Now, what do you have to say to the people out there who might be centrists or those who lean to the right, who enjoy your program, who are afraid that now there won't be anything but radical left legislation that gets through because Democrats hold everything? They're afraid about the packing of the court. They're afraid of D.C. becoming a state, Puerto Rico becoming a state, being outnumbered, never winning an election again. What do you think about all that stuff?
First off, Puerto Rico should be a state because they should be paying taxes. They don't pay taxes. They also don't vote. But they get money from us as a protectorate. So make them a state. D.C. should have been a state a long time ago. But if not a state, then they should have more rights and they should have representation, voting representation, more so than they did. The mayor of D.C. could not call out the National Guard. Only Donald Trump could for D.C. Ralph Northam and the governor of Maryland didn't have to go through Donald Trump to call out the National Guard. Governors can do it. There's nothing in the legislation that allows D.C. to do it. Will there never be another Republican president? I don't think that's true. Even if we did take in Puerto Rico and D.C. as states. As to the far left agenda, I don't think you're going to see the Green New Deal, but I do think you'll see movement towards a greener economy. Ford Motor Company is already doing that. There's a hybrid Mustang now. There's a hybrid pickup truck. Companies are already moving in that direction. I think the far radical left stuff, that will never make it in there because your centrist Democrats aren't going to let it happen. And your your centrist Republicans and Democrats make a pretty good block of Congress right now. I do think you'll see more on civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
I do think you will see more on infrastructure, because our infrastructure has just gone to the dogs.
Yeah.
I guess that's the nicest thing I can say.
It's the nicest way to put it.
We know my mouth can get me in trouble. I have trouble staying in my lane.
Yeah.
I do think you're going to see Biden working with both sides of the aisle and Harris working with both sides of the aisle, trying to keep them moving in a generally better direction that is better for this country.